So in the previous videos, we walked through the volume boot record for a FAT32 file system. We also covered the introduction to the FAT table and how the clusters are tracked within the FAT32 file system when it's asked to store data. Now let's take a look at how file names and metadata associated with a file are tracked within the FAT32 file system. The information about a file name, timestamps, things like starting locations, that type of information is stored within directory entries. The data itself, what is the file, are stored in those clusters located throughout the file system. So, very much similar to how we look at other types of file systems, the root directory is the base of this particular file system. Additional directories, if we made a directory in this file system called secret stuff, that would be a directory further along in the chain. So it would go the root directory and then secret stuff. But everything goes back to the root directory. Think about in a regular Windows environment when you open up the C drive, before you click anywhere else, that base where you see those directories, that base itself is the root directory for that drive. It's the root of that drive. In a Linux environment, that would be the slash. That's the root of the file system. So in the FAT32 file system, we're going to take a look at breaking down one of the directory entries, again for STS1 confidential. So to get started, we're going to use the same file system, and we had already navigated to the root directory. But so the tool itself tracks a lot of this information for you, presents this information for you. But what if you had to do it by hand or verify and validate your tools, which is always a best practice? There's ways to do this and ways to break this down. We're going to modify our tool just slightly to give ourselves the best case scenario. Each directory entry within the FAT32 file system is 32 bytes in length. So we're going to actually adjust our width here to a substantial 32 bytes per line. That here is going to switch our tool so that way we can see each entry one piece at a time. So now that we can see our entry one piece at a time, one entry at a time, we can now go ahead and look at our data interpreter. And we're going to also, in this case, go to Options, Data Interpreter, or Alt F5 off your keyboard, and we're going to select DOS date and time 32-bit. Hitting Enter will give us that value. Now, what it shows you is dependent on where you are. You have to be in the right location to get the right timestamps, and it's just interpreting hex for 32 bits. So you have to just make sure you're in the right spot. So just be careful about that. So for the purposes of this walkthrough, we're going to break this into several sections, and we're going to take a look at our textbook. And we can see that it presents it in one way here, which is completely correct. But we're also going to just maybe use a little bit more of a simplified structure that we can see in our lecture notes. Using this structure here, we can see that we have some segments that we can follow. And we're going to be using the 0x00 and the hexadecimal guides here. So going back to our tool, let's move this over for just a little bit more space. Staying with our tool here, we can see that if we move down here, that this is the start of the concept for a short file name. Now a FAT32 file system is capable of supporting short and long file names. And a long file name in the FAT32 file system is anything defined as greater than 8 characters, for example. There's a few other characteristics, but think anything greater than 8 characters in the file name, you're going to trigger the creation of a long file name. So if we had a file that was just called sts.pdf, there would only be a short file name. But once you start getting sts-1-confidential or secret, you're starting to deal with concepts that are a little bit bigger, and file names that are a little bit bigger will create a long file name. The maximum that a FAT32 file system can hold for a long file name is 255 characters, which is a rather consistent number you'll hear across a lot of different types of computing environments and file systems. 255 characters is the longest you can have for a single long file name in a FAT32 file system.